In a realm where darkness often overpowered the light, there lived a woman named Elysa. Her life was not one of simple pleasures or tranquil days, rather, it was a continuous battle against the encroaching shadows that seemed to dominate her world. Elysa was no ordinary woman. Her resilience was as vast as the oceans, and her wisdom rivaled that of the ancient sages. From an early age, Elysa had known nothing but hardship. Born in a remote village surrounded by towering mountains and impenetrable forests, she was well acquainted with the cruel realities of life. The land was unforgiving, with winters that cut through the flesh like a sharpened blade and summers that withered crops before they could bear fruit. Her family, poor and struggling, had little to offer her except the knowledge that survival in this world required more than mere strength. It demanded unwavering willpower and an unyielding spirit. The villagers, who inhabited this rugged terrain, were people hardened by their environment. They were accustomed to the harshness of life, and in them, Elysa saw both the reflection of her own struggles and the potential to rise above them. Yet, even among these resilient folk, Elysa stood out. From a young age, her eyes held a fire, a determination that seemed almost otherworldly. She was the child who never cried when she fell, the girl who stood up to the bullies who dared to mock her family's poverty. Yet, Elysa was not deterred by the severity of her surroundings. She had always possessed a curious mind, one that questioned the purpose behind the pain and the lessons hidden within every struggle. Why must life be so relentless? She would often ponder, staring into the night sky as if the stars might whisper the answers she sought. As the eldest of 3 children, Elysa took on responsibilities that would have broken someone weaker, someone less determined to prove themselves. She tended to the fields, fetched water from the icy streams, and comforted her siblings during the long, cold nights when hunger gnawed at their bellies and the wind howled through the cracks in their tiny home. Each task was a test, a challenge that Elysa met with a fierce resolve. As she grew older, Elysa's curiosity transformed into a fierce determination. She realized that the world was a place where one either succumbed to despair or rose above it, learning from every trial that came her way. And so, Elysa made a vow: she would not be broken by the darkness. Instead, she would confront it, challenge it, and emerge stronger with every victory. She began to seek out knowledge wherever she could find it. The village had few books, but Elysa read every one she could get her hands on, devouring stories of distant lands, of heroes and heroines who overcame impossible odds. She learned from the elders, listening to their tales of ancient wisdom and survival, absorbing every lesson like a sponge. But Elysa knew that knowledge alone would not be enough. The world was filled with unseen forces, with powers that could not be understood merely through words or thoughts. She needed to test herself, to see if she had the strength to face the trials that she knew awaited her beyond the borders of her village. Elysa's first significant trial came when she was barely past the age of 18. By this time, she had grown into a young woman of considerable strength and resolve, though the village still saw her as the little girl who had once skinned her knees playing in the fields. The time had come to prove herself, not just to others, but to herself. The villagers had long told tales of a hidden path deep within the forest, a path that, if found, could lead one to unimaginable riches. But this path was treacherous, guarded by creatures born of nightmares and veiled in an ever-present mist that disoriented even the most experienced of travelers. Many had ventured into the forest, seeking the path, only to return empty-handed or not at all. It was said that those who found the path would be forever changed, for better or for worse. Despite the warnings, Elysa felt an inexplicable pull toward this path. She knew that it was more than just a physical journey, it was a metaphor for her own life. The path represented the unknown, the fears she had to face, and the challenges she had to overcome. She understood that the riches promised were not of gold or jewels, but of knowledge and self-discovery. The journey would be perilous, but Elysa had never been one to shy away from danger. One cold morning, with the first frost of winter beginning to creep over the land, Elysa set out to find the path. She left behind her family, promising them that she would return stronger, wiser, and with the answers they all sought. Her mother wept as she left, her father gave a solemn nod, and her siblings watched with wide eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. Elysa carried with her only the essentials, a small bag of food, a flask of water, a sturdy knife, and a pendant her mother had given her for protection. The pendant, an heirloom passed down through generations, was said to possess a fragment of the wisdom of their ancestors. The forest was a labyrinth of twisted roots and towering trees, their branches intertwined to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. The deeper Elysa ventured, the darker and more foreboding the forest became. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures lurking in the shadows. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Each step Elysa took seemed to echo in the silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if she would turn back. For days, Elysa wandered through the forest, her resolve tested by hunger, fatigue, and the ever-present sense of being watched. The mist that clung to the ground seemed to whisper doubts into her ears, telling her to turn back, to abandon this foolish quest before it was too late. Her muscles ached, her stomach growled with hunger, and her mind played tricks on her, conjuring images of her family, of warm fires and comforting embraces. But Elysa's determination was stronger than the whispers of the mist. She pressed on, relying on her instincts and the strength of her convictions to guide her. She knew that this journey was not just about finding the path, it was about proving to herself that she could navigate the uncertainties of life, that she could trust in her own abilities to overcome any obstacle. Each night, she would find a place to rest, lighting a small fire to ward off the cold and the creatures that prowled in the darkness. She would sit by the fire, holding her mother's pendant in her hand, and remind herself of the reasons she had embarked on this journey. At long last, after what felt like an eternity, Elysa found the hidden path. It was narrow and winding, barely visible beneath the thick undergrowth, but it was there. The sight of it filled her with a sense of triumph, but she knew that her journey was far from over. The path was only the beginning. What lay ahead was a series of trials that would test her courage, her wisdom, and her endurance. As Elysa ventured down the path, the forest grew darker and more foreboding. The trees, once merely tall and imposing, now seemed to lean inwards, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and the mist thickened, wrapping around her like a shroud. The atmosphere was suffocating, as if the very forest was conspiring against her, trying to force her to turn back. But Elysa had come too far to retreat. She steeled herself, determined to face whatever lay ahead. It was then that she encountered the first of many obstacles, the guardian of shadows. This creature, neither human nor beast, was a manifestation of the darkness that Elysa had vowed to conquer. It stood before her, a towering figure cloaked in black, its eyes glowing with an eerie light that seemed to pierce through her very soul. The guardian's form was ever shifting, its edges blurring as if it was made of smoke and shadow. It was a creature born of nightmares, a representation of all the fears Elysa had ever harbored. "Turn back," the guardian's voice echoed through the forest, deep and resonant, as if the shadows themselves were speaking. "This path is not meant for the likes of you. It is a place of despair, where hope comes to die." But Elysa stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest but her resolve unshaken. "I will not turn back," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness. "I have come to face the darkness, not flee from it." The guardian laughed, a sound that reverberated through the trees like the rumble of distant thunder. "You are bold, little one, but boldness alone will not save you. You must prove your worth, or be consumed by the shadows." With that, the guardian lunged at Elysa, its form shifting and contorting into a mass of swirling darkness. But Elysa was ready. She had not come this far to be defeated by her fears. Drawing upon the strength she had cultivated over years of hardship, she fought back with a ferocity that surprised even herself. Her knife, though simple, became an extension of her will as she struck at the creature, her movements guided by instinct and the fire that burned within her. The battle was fierce and relentless, a clash of light and shadow that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest. The guardian was powerful, its attacks swift and merciless, but Elysa was determined. She dodged and parried, her every movement a testament to the years of toil and struggle that had forged her into the warrior she was. But it was not just physical strength that Elysa relied on, it was her mind, her ability to think strategically, to anticipate the Guardian's moves and counter them with precision. As the battle raged on, Elysa realized that the Guardian was not just a physical manifestation of her fears, but a test of her resolve. The creature's strength grew with her doubts, its attacks becoming more vicious each time Elysa allowed fear to creep into her heart. She understood then that to defeat the Guardian, she had to conquer her own doubts and fears. Summoning all her courage, Elysa closed her eyes and focused inward, drawing upon the lessons she had learned from the struggles she had faced throughout her life. She thought of her family, of the hardships they had endured together, and of the promise she had made to herself to rise above the darkness. With each thought, she felt her resolve strengthen, and the power of the Guardian weaken. When she opened her eyes, Elysa was no longer afraid. She faced the Guardian with a calm determination, her heart steady and her mind clear. "You are not real," she said firmly. "You are a shadow, a manifestation of my fears. And I will not be controlled by fear." With those words, Elysa made her final strike. Her blade, now glowing with an inner light, pierced the heart of the Guardian. The creature let out a deafening roar, its form dissolving into a swirl of darkness before dissipating into the air. The forest grew silent once more, the oppressive weight of the shadows lifting as the Guardian was vanquished. Elysa stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, her body aching from the battle. But she felt a deep sense of relief and accomplishment. She had faced her fears head-on and emerged victorious. The path ahead was still long and uncertain, but she had proven to herself that she had the strength to overcome whatever lay ahead. The victory over the Guardian of Shadows was but the first of many trials that awaited Elysa on her journey. As she continued down the path, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller and more ancient, their bark etched with runes that spoke of forgotten times and lost civilizations. The air became charged with a sense of history, as if the very ground she walked upon was imbued with the memories of those who had come before her. It was here, in the heart of the ancient forest, that Elysa faced her next trial, the trial of the ancients. The path led her to a clearing, at the center of which stood a massive stone altar, covered in moss and vines. Surrounding the altar were statues of long-forgotten gods, their faces weathered by time but still radiating an aura of power and authority. The statues seemed to watch her with eyes that bore into her soul, judging her worthiness to continue on her journey. As Elysa approached the altar, she felt a sense of unease. This trial was different from the last. It was not a test of physical strength or courage, but of wisdom and understanding. She could feel the weight of the expectations placed upon her by the ancients, the pressure to prove herself not just as a warrior, but as a seeker of truth. The altar held a single object, a chalice, intricately carved from a single piece of obsidian. It shimmered in the dim light, beckoning her to take it. But Elysa knew that this was no ordinary chalice. It was a vessel of knowledge, filled with the wisdom of the ancients. To drink from it would be to accept the burden of that knowledge, to understand the truths that had been hidden from the world for centuries. But Elysa also knew that with knowledge came responsibility. The chalice represented a choice, the choice to seek the truth, no matter how painful or difficult it might be, or to turn away and remain in ignorance. It was a choice that would define her path, not just in this trial, but in the journey of life itself. Elysa hesitated for a moment, the weight of the decision heavy upon her. But then she remembered the vow she had made to herself, to face the darkness and seek the light, no matter the cost. She reached out and took the chalice, feeling its cool surface against her skin. As she lifted it to her lips, the world around her began to change. The forest, the statues, the altar, they all dissolved into mist, replaced by visions that flooded her mind. She saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of stars and the death of worlds. She witnessed the cruelty and kindness of humanity, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that defined existence. The knowledge was overwhelming, a torrent of images and emotions that threatened to consume her. But Elysa did not falter. She absorbed the knowledge, letting it flow through her, becoming a part of her very being. She understood now that the trial was not just about acquiring knowledge, but about accepting the responsibility that came with it. She saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, a place of endless possibilities, where every choice mattered, where every action had consequences. When the visions finally subsided, Elysa found herself back in the clearing, the chalice empty in her hands. But she was no longer the same person. The knowledge she had gained had changed her, deepened her understanding of the world and her place in it. She felt a new sense of purpose, a drive to use the wisdom she had acquired to guide her actions and make a difference in the world. The statues of the ancients seemed to nod in approval, their stony faces softening as if they acknowledged her growth. Elysa bowed to them, a gesture of respect for the knowledge they had bestowed upon her. She knew that the path ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but she was ready to face them, armed with the wisdom of the ancients and the strength of her own convictions. The knowledge Elysa had gained from the trial of the ancients was both a blessing and a curse. While it granted her a deeper understanding of the world, it also opened her eyes to the darkness that lurked within the hearts of men and women. She saw the suffering that existed in the world, the pain that people inflicted upon one another out of fear, greed, and ignorance. This awareness weighed heavily upon her, threatening to drag her into a pit of despair. The path now led Elysa into a desolate wasteland, a barren expanse where nothing grew and the sky was perpetually overcast. The ground was cracked and dry, and the air was filled with a sense of hopelessness that seemed to seep into her very soul. This was the abyss of despair, a place where many had lost their way, consumed by the darkness that resided within them. Elysa felt the weight of the knowledge she had gained pressing down on her, the burden of understanding the true nature of the world. The pain and suffering she had witnessed in her visions haunted her, and for the first time, she began to doubt herself. Was she truly strong enough to face this darkness? Could she overcome the despair that threatened to consume her? As she walked through the wasteland, Elysa encountered the ghosts of those who had failed the trial. They appeared as shadowy figures, their faces etched with sorrow and regret. They whispered to her, their voices filled with despair. "Turn back, Elysa," they urged. "There is no hope here. The world is filled with pain and suffering, and nothing you do can change that. It is better to give in, to let the darkness take you, than to continue this futile struggle." The words of the ghost struck at the core of Elysa's doubts. She felt herself wavering, the strength that had carried her this far beginning to falter. The burden of knowledge was too great, the pain too overwhelming. She wanted to give up, to let go of the fight and succumb to the despair that surrounded her. But then she remembered her family, her village, and the people who had placed their trust in her. She thought of the trials she had already overcome, the battles she had fought to reach this point. She knew that if she gave in now, all that she had endured would be for nothing. Elysa took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on the light that still burned within her. She reminded herself that the darkness was not all that existed in the world. There was also love, compassion, and hope, qualities that had the power to overcome even the deepest despair. She had seen this in her visions as well, moments of kindness and bravery that shone like beacons in the darkness. With renewed determination, Elysa pushed forward, ignoring the whispers of the ghosts. She knew that they were manifestations of her own fears, the doubts that had always lingered at the edges of her mind. But she also knew that she was stronger than those doubts. She had faced them before, and she would face them again. As she continued her journey through the abyss of despair, Elysa began to notice small signs of life amidst the desolation. A single flower growing in a crack in the ground, its petals bright and vibrant despite the barren landscape. A tiny stream of water, trickling through the dry earth, offering a glimmer of hope in an otherwise hopeless place. These small miracles reminded Elysa that even in the darkest of times, there was always a spark of light, a reason to keep fighting. She held on to that thought, letting it guide her through the abyss, until at last she emerged on the other side. The abyss of despair had tested Elysa in ways she had never imagined, but she emerged from it stronger and more determined than ever. She knew now that the true battle was not against the external forces of darkness, but against the inner demons that threatened to overwhelm her. And she was ready to face them. The path led her to a mountain, its peak shrouded in clouds. This was the final trial, the last obstacle that stood between Elysa and the completion of her journey. At the summit of the mountain awaited the source of the darkness that had plagued her world, the force that had sought to break her spirit at every turn. The climb was arduous, the air thin and cold as she ascended the steep slopes. But Elysa pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. Every step she took brought her closer to the final confrontation, to the moment when she would face the ultimate test of her strength, wisdom, and resolve. When Elysa finally reached the summit, she found herself standing before a figure cloaked in darkness. It was a reflection of herself, a twisted version of the woman she had become. This was the embodiment of all her fears, doubts, and insecurities, the darkness that resided within her own soul. "You have come far, Elysa," the figure spoke, its voice cold and devoid of emotion. "But you have not yet conquered the darkness. To do so, you must first conquer yourself." Elysa knew that this was the final trial, the battle against her own inner darkness. She could not defeat it with brute strength or cunning. She had to confront it with honesty and self-acceptance. "You are the part of me that I have always feared," Elysa said, her voice steady. "But you are also a part of me that I must accept. I will not fight you, for to fight you is to fight myself. Instead, I will embrace you, and in doing so, I will find the balance that I seek." With those words, Elysa stepped forward, reaching out to the figure. As she did, the darkness began to dissipate, the figure's form dissolving into a swirl of mist. Elysa felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of peace that she had never known before. She had faced her greatest fear, the fear of herself, and had emerged whole. The clouds that had shrouded the mountain began to clear, revealing a breathtaking vista of the world below. Elysa stood at the summit, the weight of her journey lifting from her shoulders. She had conquered the darkness, not by destroying it, but by understanding and accepting it as a part of herself. Elysa returned to her village, changed in ways that only those who had faced the darkness could understand. The trials she had faced had forged her into a woman of unparalleled strength and wisdom, a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. She shared the knowledge she had gained, teaching others the importance of confronting their fears and seeking the light within themselves. Her journey had taught her that life was not about avoiding the darkness, but about finding the strength to navigate it, to learn from it, and to emerge stronger on the other side. She became a leader in her village, a source of inspiration for all who knew her. And so, Elysa's legacy lived on, not just in the village where she had been born, but in the hearts of all who heard her story. She had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not through the power of her sword, but through the power of her spirit. And in doing so, she had shown the world that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light to guide the way. Congratulations! You have successfully completed your English listening practice. You can like the video and subscribe to the channel for new English stories.